Yo, Amateur Lore here. So March Madness is finally here. I think right as this video is coming out, the first 4 games are happening, so good luck to those teams. Anyway, this is a compilation of every Power 5 basketball school's deepest March Madness run. If you kept up with the series as I was doing it, then you've probably seen most of this video, so just a heads up. And if you haven't, then welcome. And try to see how far your team has to go in this year's tournament to surpass their previous deepest run. And I know this intro is getting long, just one more thing. Keep commenting your March Madness hot takes if you want to be included in my March Madness hot take video, which is coming out soon, probably tomorrow. Okay, intro out of the way. Let's jump right into every Power 5 school's deepest March Madness run. First team up in the mighty SEC is the Alabama Crimson Tide. And if we're talking about football, then they would without a doubt be the GOATs of the conference, but we're not. So when it comes to basketball, the Crimson Tide obviously don't have anywhere near as much accolades as the football department, but they've still been pretty decent, making the men's basketball tournament most years and usually being competitive when they do. As Alabama has made a handful of Sweet 16s, the Elite Eight twice, and the Final Four one time. And their Final Four run is literally younger than my cat, as it happened last year, so let's take a quick look at it. Going back to the 2023/24 college basketball season, the Crimson Tide, coached by Nate Oates and led by Mark Sears, Alabama went into the tournament with a record of 21-11 in the 4th seed. The first 2 games would be pretty smooth for the Tide, as they would take down the College of Charleston 109-96 and Grand Canyon 72-61. In the Sweet 16 versus number 1 seeded North Carolina Tar Heels, this game would be a banger that would go down to the wire, as Alabama would be up late, missing their free throws to put the game away, giving the Tar Heels a shot to tie the game with one last shot. Fortunately for Bama, their defense was locked in, as they would block the 3 from North Carolina to secure the win 89-87. Moving on to the Elite Eight versus the Tigers, Alabama would shoot 44% from 3, and that hot shooting would carry them to an 89-82 win, punching the Tide's ticket to their first ever Final Four, where sadly they run into a dynasty in the UConn Huskies, losing 86-72, putting it into Bama's deepest tournament run to date. From Alabama, we go to Arkansas. Man, this program has actually been one of the better ones in the SEC historically, winning it all 1 time and going to the Final Four 6 times, with the good majority of those Final Four appearances coming in the early 90s. And I will mention, the last 5 years as I'm recording this video, the Razorbacks have made it to the Elite Eight twice and the Sweet 16 once. But for their deepest tournament run, we're going to have to go back to the Arkansas Razorbacks heyday, the early 90s, more specifically the 1993/94 college basketball season, where coached by Nolan Richardson and led by star forward Corliss Williamson, the Razorbacks would enter the tournament with a 25-3 record and the 1st seed. Arkansas would cruise through their first 3 games of the tournament, defeating North Carolina A&T 94-79, Georgetown 85-73, and in the Sweet 16 against Tulsa, the Razorbacks would win by 19, 103-84. Versus Michigan and whatever was left of the Fab 5 in the Elite Eight, Arkansas would win 76-68, despite a 30-point outburst from Juwan Howard. Moving on to the Final Four against the Arizona Wildcats, a 29-point and 13-rebound day from Corliss Williamson would be more than enough to give the Razorbacks the edge over Arizona, as they would win 91-82, advancing Arkansas to the Natty, where they would match up against the Duke Blue Devils. And although this game would be tight, Arkansas would hold on, winning their lone basketball national championship. Next up, we have the Auburn Tigers, and I was extremely shocked to find out this basketball program hasn't been as successful as I thought they had been, as Auburn has only made it to the Final Four 1 time and has multiple 10-year stretches of not making the men's basketball tournament at all. But as of late, they've been one of the best teams in the SEC and one of the top 20 programs in the country, and a lot of that has to do with Bruce Pearl taking over at head coach, as he has really turned this program around. And as I'm recording, they're currently the number 1 ranked team in the country. As for Auburn's deepest tournament run, we don't have to go back far, as during the 2018/19 college basketball season, coached by Bruce Pearl and led by Bryce Brown, the Auburn Tigers would enter the tourney with a 26-9 record in the 5th seed, going on a run that the Auburn faithful would never forget. Things wouldn't start out smooth though, as in the first game of the tournament versus New Mexico State, the Tigers would be up by 2 with less than 2 seconds left, sending Terrell Brown of New Mexico State to the charity stripe, where he would make the first one and miss the second one. But they'd grab the offensive board and miss the game-winning shot, giving Auburn the anxiety-inducing win 78-77. Their next 2 games of the tournament would be a lot smoother, as they would take down Kansas 89-75 and North Carolina 97-80, sending Auburn to the Elite Eight, where they would match up against their conference foe Kentucky. This matchup would be a movie, as it would take overtime to decide the winner, and with the help of a 26-point night from Jared Harper, Auburn would win 77-71, advancing them to their first Final Four in program history, where they would match up against the 1st seeded Virginia Cavaliers. Auburn would be up 61-57 with less than 17 seconds in the game, but 6 points from Kyle Guy in the final 10 seconds would propel Virginia over the Tigers 63-62, putting an end to Auburn's deepest tournament run to date. Alright, so next up is the Georgia Bulldogs, and this is a weird one, as the Bulldogs have somehow only made the men's basketball tournament 12 times, and no Washington Caps, but that really shocked me. I know Georgia isn't known as some basketball powerhouse, but with the amount of money that this school brings in every year, you would just think they'd be fielding some more competitive basketball teams. But that's not the case, as they haven't made the tourney in the last 9 years. But I will mention they do look like they have a good shot at making it this year, especially with their big win over my 3rd-ranked Florida Gators. Anyway, for this team's deepest tournament run, we have to go all the way back to Georgia's first time making the men's basketball tournament in the 1982/1983 college basketball season. We're coached by Hugh Durham and led by Vern Fleming. The 18-9 Bulldogs would shock the world, going on a crazy turning run, which started with a nail-biter against VCU that the Bulldogs would barely escape, winning 56-54. And the close wins wouldn't stop here, as they would beat St. John's 70-67 and North Carolina 82-77. Sadly, the magical run would end to this year's team of destiny, the NC State Wolfpack, as Georgia would get beat 67-60, putting it into their deepest tournament run to date. Kentucky doesn't really need an introduction now, do they? As they've easily been one of the best programs in all of college basketball, going to an insane 17 Final Fours and winning 8 national championships, as well as consistently producing top NBA draft picks. For this program's deepest tournament run, we're going to have to take a look at their most recent national championship, which takes us back to the 2011/2012 college basketball season. We're coached by John Calipari and led by countless future NBA players, most notably Anthony Davis. The 32-2 first-seeded Kentucky Wildcats would go on a dominant run to the promised land, starting with 3 straight blowout wins against Western Kentucky 81-66, Iowa State 87-71, and in the Sweet 16, Indiana 102-90. Versus the Baylor Bears in the Elite Eight, nothing much would change, as the Wildcats would cruise by Baylor 82-70, setting up a Final Four matchup against Louisville. An 18-point, 14-rebound night from Anthony Davis would be more than enough to catapult Kentucky over Louisville, as they would win 69-61. Versus Kansas in the Natty, Kentucky would put a bow on their March Madness run, continuing to dominate, taking down the Jayhawks 67-59. Next team up in the SEC is the LSU Tigers, and while they haven't had anywhere near the level of success that Kentucky has had, they've still been pretty decent overall, going to 4 Final Fours and producing a couple of top NBA draft picks, most notably Shaq and Ben Simmons. Alright, so for the Tigers' deepest tournament run, we only have to go back to the 2005/2006 college basketball season. We're coached by John Brady and led by Glenn Big Baby Davis. The 23-8 4th-seeded LSU Tigers would go on a run that Baton Rouge still talks about to this day. LSU would open up the tourney with an easy win against Iona 80-64. However, in their next game, things would be a little closer, well, extremely close, as LSU would narrowly escape the Texas A&M Aggies 58-57. Big shout out to Big Baby, his 21 buckets played a huge role in this win. Against Duke in the Sweet 16, LSU would continue to come out on top of the number 1 seed Duke Blue Devils, upsetting them 62-54, sending the current coach of the Lakers, JJ Redick, home sad, and the Tigers would carry that momentum into the Elite Eight against Texas, winning 70-60. But a loaded UCLA squad would be too much for LSU to handle, and it's crazy because they were favored to win this game as the lower seed, but obviously that wouldn't happen, as the Bruins would put an end to LSU's March Madness run, taking them down 59-45 in the Final Four. Mississippi State has been one of the weaker teams in the SEC overall, not making it past the second round in the men's basketball tournament in the last 27 plus years. Although I do have to mention, this program has been to 1 Final Four, and as I'm currently recording this video, the Bulldogs are doing pretty decent and look to make a nice March Madness run this year, hopefully winning a game or two. So for this program's deepest tournament run, we have to go back to that Final Four year, which came all the way back during the 1995/96 college basketball season, when coached by Richard Williams and led by Darrell Wilson, a 22-7 5th-seeded Mississippi State squad would enter the tournament and go on their best ever run, opening up with 2 wins against VCU 58-51 and Princeton 63-41. In the Sweet 16, Mississippi State would run into the first-seeded UConn Huskies. A 27-point night from Darrell Wilson would give the Bulldogs the edge over the Ray Allen-led Huskies 60-55, and would follow it up with a 10-point win over Cincinnati, sending them to their one and only Final Four, where sadly they would lose to the Syracuse Orange 77-69, putting an end to the Bulldogs' deepest tournament run to date. Next team up in the SEC is the Missouri Tigers, and this program has been pretty good overall, historically making it to the Elite Eight 5 times, and the Sweet 16 a handful of times. And while Missouri hasn't made it past the second round in a couple of years, their squad this year while I'm recording this video looks legit, and hopefully will make some noise in March. For Missouri's deepest tournament run, we don't have to go back too far, as one of their 5 Elite Eights I mentioned happened during the 2008/2009 college basketball season. We're coached by Mark Anderson and led by DeMar Carroll. A 28-6 3rd-seeded Tiger squad will go on one of their best March Madness runs in program history, starting off with the 78-59 win against Cornell, and in the second round game versus Marquette and Jimmy Butler, the Tigers would dominate majority of the game, winning 83-79. Versus Memphis in the Sweet 16, even though the future Rookie of the Year Tyreke Evans would drop 33 points, Missouri would still clutch out the dub, winning 102-91, sending Missouri to the Elite Eight, where they would run into the first-seeded Huskies, sadly losing 82-75, putting an end to the Tigers' deepest March Madness run to date. From one former Big 12 team to join the SEC, we rotate over to another former Big 12 team to join the SEC, the Oklahoma Sooners. And I will say this, I was extremely shocked looking back at some of the Sooners' previous seasons, as I had no idea Oklahoma has been like that in basketball, as pretty much ever since the 80s, this team has been a lock to make the men's basketball tournament, making it more times than not, as well as going to 5 Final Fours. And I should have honestly expected that, knowing that the Sooners have produced some pretty high draft picks over the years. Anyway, for the Sooners' deepest tournament run, we have to take a look at one of those Final Fours, which brings us back to the 2015/16 college basketball season. We're coached by Lon Kruger and led by the Naismith Award-winning guard Buddy Hield. The 25-7 second-seed Oklahoma Sooners would open up their tournament, winning against Cal State Bakersfield 82-68 and VCU 85-81. The Sooners would catch heat in their next 2 games, winning by double digits in both of them, taking down the Aggies 77-63 and Oregon 80-68, sending OU to the Final Four, where they would be matched up against Villanova. The Sooners would get smacked, losing 95-55. 51, ending their tournament run in ugly fashion. Next team up in the SEC is the Ole Miss Rebels, and I'm not going to sugarcoat this. They've been pretty bad, only making the tournament 9 times, going to 0 Final Fours and 0 Elite Eights. Hey, at least they had Marshall Henderson, and I don't care how much coke bro did, he was easily one of the most entertaining college basketball players I've ever seen. I don't know, I just felt like I needed to get that off my chest. For Ole Miss's deepest March Madness run, I wish it was the year of the land shark, but it's not, so we have to go back to the 2000/2001 college basketball season, where coached by Rod Barnes and led by Raheem Lockhart, the 25-7 third-seeded Ole Miss Rebels would go on their best run in program history, opening up with a butt clincher against Iona that the Rebels were 10-point favorites in. However, the game would go down to the wire, where Ole Miss would barely escape against Iona 72-70, sending them to the next round where they would face off against the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. The Rebels would need a 24-point night from Raheem Lockhart to take down the Irish 59-56, sending Ole Miss to their one and only Sweet 16, where they would lose by 10 to Arizona 66-56, putting it into their deepest tournament run to date. South Carolina has been slightly better than Ole Miss when it comes to basketball, but just a tiny bit, as they've made the tournament 10 times, but hey, at least they made it to the Final Four once, which actually wasn't too long ago, so let's take a look at it, which takes us back to the 2016/17 college basketball season. We're coached by Frank Martin and led by Sendarius Thornwell. The 22-10 7-seeded South Carolina Gamecocks would go on probably one of the most unexpected March Madness runs I've ever seen, starting the tourney off by taking down Marquette 93-73 and a loaded Duke squad which included Jason Tatum 88-81. South Carolina was feeling themselves as they would take down Baylor 70-50, and thanks to a 26-point night from Sendarius Thornwell, the Gamecocks would take down my Florida Gators in the Elite Eight 77-70, advancing South Carolina to their one and only Final Four, where they would lose a pretty close game to the Gonzaga Bulldogs 77-73, putting it into their deepest tournament run to date. And I might have to make a full video on the South Carolina Final Four run. Let me know in the comments if y'all want that. Next team up in the SEC is the Tennessee Volunteers, and right off the back I have to mention my jaw dropped when I peeped the Vols haven't ever made it to the Final Four, but they have been to the Elite Eight twice, with one of them coming a year to the day I'm recording this video. I don't know why I thought the Vols had made the Final Four. It might be because of the success of their women's basketball team, or how good they have been recently, as under coach Rick Barnes, Tennessee has been one of the best basketball programs in the entire country. Anyway, for the Vols' deepest tournament run, we only have to go back a year to the 2023/24 college basketball season, where coached by Rick Barnes and led by the current Laker Dalton Knecht, the 24-8 second-seeded Vols would open the tourney up with a blowout win against everybody's favorite underdog St. Peter's 83-49. The next game would be a lot closer, as against the Longhorns, the Vols would win by 4, 62-58, thanks to an 18-point night from Knecht 4. Dalton Knecht would continue the high level of play, dropping 26 against Creighton, and the Vols would need every bit of it to take down the Blue Jays 82-75, advancing Tennessee to the Elite Eight, where they would face off against the juggernaut first-seeded Purdue Boilermakers. The Vols would fight hard, but Zach Edey would drop a 40-burger, clutching the dub for his team 72-66, putting an end to the Tennessee Volunteers' deepest March Madness run to date. Next team up in the SEC is the Texas A&M Aggies, and overall in their history, they haven't really made too much noise in the college basketball world, never making it farther than the Sweet 16. But I do have to say that since the year 2005, the Aggies have really been consistent when it comes to making the men's basketball tournament, as they have been pretty much a lock for March since 2005. And as I'm recording, they're looking like a lock to make the tournament this year as well. Anyway, for the Aggies' deepest tournament run, we don't have to go back too far, as it happened during the 2017/18 college basketball season, where coached by Bill Kennedy and led by Tyler Davis, the 20-12 7-seeded Aggies would go on their deepest tournament run to date, starting with the 73-69 win over Providence, and they would follow that win up with an upset smacking over the North Carolina Tar Heels 86-65, sending the Aggies to the Sweet 16, where they would run into the better overall team in the Michigan Wolverines, losing 99-72, putting it into the Aggies' deepest run to date. Staying in the state of Texas, for the next team up in the SEC, we have the Texas Longhorns. This program has been to 3 Final Fours and have been extremely consistent when it comes to men's basketball, pretty much since the beginning of the 90s, only missing the men's basketball tournament 5 times since 1989, minus this season because they look like they might not make it. But regardless, that level of consistency is really impressive. And the Longhorns are just not making the tournament to go one and done. They made some pretty deep runs, which takes us back to the 2002/2003 college basketball season, where coached by Rick Barnes and led by TJ Ford, a 22-6 first-seeded Texas Longhorn squad would look to win it all, opening up the tourney with 2 blowout wins over UNC Asheville 82-61 and Purdue 77-67, sending the Longhorns to the Sweet 16, where they would face off against UConn. A 27-point night from Brandon Mooten would give Texas the edge over the Huskies, winning 82-78. TJ Ford would follow up his teammates' huge night with one of his own in the Elite Eight, dropping 19 against Michigan State in an 85-76 win, advancing the Longhorns to the Final Four, where they would run into a Carmelo Anthony-led Syracuse Orange squad, where he would drop 33 on Texas, ending their tournament run with a 95-84 loss in the Final Four. From a team who has been pretty great in college basketball, we go to a team who has just been kind of mid, the Vanderbilt Commodores. When it comes to the school's basketball lore, this school really doesn't have much, reaching 0 Final Fours, and as I'm recording, this school is going on 7 straight years of not making the men's basketball tournament, although they do look like they will be making it in this year, so hopefully there's that. For Vandy's deepest tournament run, it would be all the way back during the 2005 college basketball season, where they would make the Elite Eight, but they literally only played like one game, so I'm going to choose their next best run, which takes us to the 2006/2007 college basketball season. Where coached by Kevin Stallings and led by Derek Byers, the 2011 6-seeded Vanderbilt Commodores would start March Madness with the spanking of George Washington, 77-44. The next round would be a lot closer for Vanderbilt, but a 27-point night from Derek Byers would be enough to give Vandy the edge over Washington State, 78-74, sending the Commodores to the Sweet 16, where sadly this run would come to an end as they would lose to Georgetown by 1 point, 66-65. The last team up in the mighty SEC is my favorite college basketball team, the Florida Gators. Where do I start with the Gators? Well, for their basketball lore, the Florida Gators have been one of the more successful college basketball teams in the SEC, winning 2 national titles, making 5 Final Fours and 9 Elite Eights. Also having that crazy streak of making 4 straight Elite Eights from 2011 to 2014. And I do have to mention that while I'm recording this video, Florida is currently ranked as the 5th best team in the country and looks to go on yet another deep March run. Hopefully. It would be ass if I just jinxed it. So for the Gators' deepest tournament run, we have to go back to the year they won the Natty, which takes us to the 2006/2007 college basketball season. We're coached by Billy Donovan and led by countless NBA players, most notably to me, Al Horford, Corey Brewer, and Joakim Noah. The 29-5 first-seeded Florida Gators would enter the tourney looking to repeat as national champions. Starting the tourney off with a blowout against Jackson State, 112-69. In the second round, the Gators would run into a little scare against Purdue, but would close the game out strong, winning 74-67. Florida would keep up the high level of play, winning their Sweet 16 game against Butler, 65-57, and in the Elite Eight against Oregon, 85-77. Sending the Gators to the Final Four, where they would face off against UCLA, and a 19-point night from Corey Brewer would be enough to put the Gators over the top, winning 76-66. And in the Natty against Ohio State, the Gators would finish off their Natty run with the 84-75 win against Ohio State. First up is the Illinois Fighting Illini. This program has low-key been one of the better Big Ten basketball schools as of late, and actually has a pretty rich basketball history, as this basketball program has made 5 Final Fours, which puts them on a list with some other great basketball schools, as few programs can claim they have been to 5 or more Final Fours. When looking into this program and their most recent deep tournament runs, we have to go back about 20 years to the year 2004/2005, when a 32-1 first-seeded Illinois squad led by a starting lineup with 5 dudes who would all sniff the NBA would walk their way into the men's basketball tournament, dominating their first 3 matches of March Madness by at least 12 points, as they would defeat Fairleigh Dickinson University 67-55, Nevada 71-59, and finally in the Sweet 16, a 14-point smacking of Milwaukee 77-63. Okay, I'll admit, these first 3 games of the tourney, Illinois was really reaping the benefits from their number 1 seed, but in the Elite Eight against Arizona, they'd be challenged for the first time in the tournament, as the game would require more time as both teams would be tied at the end of regulation. The Fighting Illini would hang on for the win, with the final score being 90-89, and I'm guessing Illinois really wasn't feeling the vibes of playing in close games, as in the Final Four they would win by 15 against the Louisville Cardinals, 72-57, sending them to the national championship, where they would be matched up against North Carolina. Illinois would fight hard, but the Tar Heels would shoot 51% from the field and 56% from 3, going up by 13 and holding on just long enough to defeat Illinois in the 2005 national championship game. Not only was this the Fighting Illini's deepest tournament run, but this 2004/2005 squad probably is one of the best teams in program history. But the topic of this video is deepest runs, not best teams, so moving on. This next one is for my old heads watching this video. So Indiana, man. It's been a little minute since this program has been dominating college basketball, but I'll just say this here, we need the Hoosiers to start acting like the blue blood they are again. Basketball is better when the Hoosiers are balling. Okay, so for this team's deepest run in the men's basketball tournament, the Hoosiers have won 5 national championships, so we're gonna have to choose from their most recent one, which takes us all the way back to the years 1986/1987. And I know there's some old heads watching this video right now thinking, the good old days of IU basketball, when you could grab players by the neck and throw chairs on the court in the middle of a game. None of that soft woke stuff you see nowadays on the court. Speaking of chairs, this team was led by an all-time great coach, Bob Knight, and would go 24-4 through the regular season, claiming the 1 seed going into the tournament. Led by Steve Alford, who was the current coach of the Nevada Wolfpack, would cruise through their first 2 tournament games, winning 92-58 against Fairfield and 107-90 against Auburn. However, their Sweet 16 matchup against Duke wouldn't be as easy, as Indiana would only defeat Duke by 6, winning narrowly 88-82. The close games wouldn't end in the Sweet 16, however, as versus LSU, Indiana would win by 1 point, 77-76. And versus the tournament favorites, UNLV, in a thriller, the Hoosiers would come out on top 97-93, sending Indiana to the Natty, where they would be matched up against the 10th seeded Syracuse Orange. This would be the Hoosiers' 3rd close game in a row, but at this point, they were battle-tested, and led by a 23-point night from Steve Alford, the Hoosiers would come out on top of Syracuse 74-73, winning the Natty as well as being their deepest run to date. So if you thought we had to go back in time for the Indiana Hoosiers, then we're going to have to hop in a time machine to find out the Iowa Hawkeyes' deepest tournament run. But first I will say this, the Hawkeyes basketball program kind of reminds me of their football program. Just consistent, you know, they might not ever make it all the way, but they're always guaranteed to make the tournament and be a 1st or 2nd round exit. Anyway, for their deepest tournament run, we have to go all the way back to the year 1956, where the 20-6 Iowa Hawkeyes, led by coach Bucky O'Connor, would enter the tournament and march their way to the national championship game. I was trying to find their seeding, but I guess seeding didn't begin in March Madness until 1979. So to get to the finals, the Hawkeyes would defeat Morehead State 97-83, Kentucky 89-77, and Temple 83-76, setting up a winner-take-all matchup in the Natty against the San Francisco Dons, led by NBA legends Bill Russell and Casey Jones. It should go go without saying there's no way a team with Bill Russell on it was losing the championship, as they would defeat the Hawkeyes 83-71, ending the Hawkeyes' natty run and being Iowa's deepest run in the NCAA tournament to date. Next up on our list of Big Ten teams and their deepest run in the tournament is the Maryland Terps. And when I was looking into this program's basketball history, I'll admit I was shocked at how successful this program was in the late 90s and early 2000s, as Maryland would enter the tournament with a 7 seed or better for 8 straight years from 1995 to 2002. Keep that 2002 season in mind, because that would be easily this program's best season in their deepest run to date. As coming into the 2002 NCAA tournament, the Terps, led by coach Gary Williams, would be sitting at 26-4 and would be awarded with the 1 seed. And to start the tournament would absolutely look like one of the best teams in the country, as they would blow out Siena 85-75 and Wisconsin 87-57. In the Sweet 16 versus Kentucky, this matchup would be a little bit closer, but Maryland would still look like the better team, winning 78-68 and advancing the Terps to the Elite Eight, where they would match up against UConn to decide who would get to move on to the Final Four versus the Kansas Jayhawks. Maryland would defeat UConn 90-82, and in the Final Four would hand the powerhouse Kansas Jayhawks a loss, advancing them to the national title game against the Indiana Hoosiers. Maryland would come out on top in the Natty 64-52, giving the Terps their lone basketball title, and to this date still sitting as Maryland's deepest tournament run. From Maryland, we head to Michigan State. The Spartans are easily one of the most recognizable brands in all of college basketball, as this program has won 2 national titles and has been to 6 Final Fours. I was low-key hoping that their deepest tournament run would include Draymond Green, because I mean, the dude is hilarious. Who else would punch somebody and then make a whole documentary about it? That's neither here or there though. So for Michigan's deepest tournament run, we have to go back to the 1999/2000 college basketball season, when the number 1 seeded Spartans, led by coach Tom Izzo, would honestly just tear their way through the tournament, as they would defeat Valparaiso 65-38, Utah 73-61, and in the Sweet 16 would crush Syracuse 75-58, sending the Spartans to the Elite Eight, where honestly not much would change, as they would beat Iowa State by 11, and in the Final Four would take care of Wisconsin 53-41, setting up a winner-take-all game against my Florida Gators. Well, unfortunately for me, the Spartans would play one of their best games of the season, easily winning 89-76, giving Michigan State its second natty in their deepest run in March Madness to date. From one team that plays ball in the state shaped like a mitten, we rotate over to another to talk about the Michigan Wolverines' deepest tournament run. And this is just a quick little fact: I had no idea the Wolverines were like that in basketball, as this program has made 8 Final Fours to date, which puts them in some elite company, even though I'm pretty sure 2 of those Final Fours have been vacated. When taking a look at Michigan's deepest tournament run, we have to go back to the 1989/90 college basketball season, as the Wolverines would enter March Madness with a 21-6 record and would be seated at the 3rd spot. Their first round matchup versus Xavier would be close, but the Wolverines would come out on top 92-87. In their round 2 game, they would have a more dominant performance, winning against South Alabama 91-82. In the Sweet 16 against another top-seeded team, the North Carolina Tar Heels, Michigan would come out on top 92-87 and would move on to the Elite Eight, where they would put the work in on the Virginia Cavaliers, winning 102-65. Following that massive win, Michigan would play in a close game, winning 83-81 against Illinois. And in the Natty against Seton Hall, regulation wouldn't be enough. This matchup would require extra minutes, and in overtime, Michigan would come out on top, winning their one and only Natty 80-79. And this obviously goes without saying, this was their deepest run in program history up to this point. Next up, we got Minnesota, and for their deepest tournament run, we don't have to go back as far like we did for Iowa, but we're still going to go far, as the Gophers would have one of their best seasons in program history during the 1996/1997 college basketball season. This team would be coached by Clem Haskins and would enter the NCAA tournament with a 27-3 record as the 1 seed. Their first 2 games of the tournament was pure domination, as they would defeat Texas State 78-46 and Temple 76-57. However, in their Sweet 16 game, Minnesota would play in an all-time classic, as versus the Clemson Tigers, it would take 2 overtimes to decide a winner, but in the end, the Gophers would come out on top 90-84, moving on to the Elite Eight, where they would face the blue blood basketball school UCLA. Minnesota came to play and would win 80-72 and would match up against Kentucky in the Final Four, but would be outplayed and lose 78-69, falling short of making the Natty, and to this date being Minnesota's one and only Final Four appearance in their deepest run in March Madness. This next entry might be one of the more faster ones in this video, as the Nebraska Cornhuskers have somehow never won a game in the NCAA men's basketball tournament. I was honestly super shocked. A big school like Nebraska has never made it to the second round of the NCAA tournament, but hey, maybe that will change soon. For their deepest run in March Madness, we don't have to go back far at all, as in 2023/2024, the Cornhuskers would make the tournament with a 23-10 record and would be rewarded with the 8th seed. As I just said like 2 seconds ago, Nebraska has never won a tournament game, so they would obviously lose their first game of the tournament to the Texas A&M Aggies 98-83, and yeah, that's the Cornhuskers' deepest run to date. Next up is the Northwestern Wildcats, one of my favorite Big Ten teams. Why are they one of my favorites? Well, it doesn't have anything to do with their on-the-court production. I just used to have a running back on NCAA football 2010, and he played on the Wildcats, and we won like 3 national championships, and ever since then I've always kept a lazy eye on them. Anyway, for Northwestern's deepest tournament run, we only have to go back like 2 years, as this basketball program hasn't been too good historically, but as of late, they have really picked it up, making it to the March Madness tournament twice in the last 3 years, and hopefully they can make it for a 4th time this year. As for the Wildcats' deepest tournament run, that would have to be, well, last year in 2023/2024, when a 21-11 9th-seeded Northwestern squad led by coach Chris Collins would enter the tournament and win their first round matchup against Florida Atlantic in overtime 77-65. Unfortunately, right after that, they would be faced up against a juggernaut UConn squad on their way to their second natty in a row. That goes without saying, Northwestern would get boat raced, losing 75-58 to the Huskies in the second round, which is their deepest tournament run to date, but I have a feeling that's going to change soon. From a program with no basketball history at all, we move on to one with a lot of it. I had no idea the Ohio State Buckeyes had been to 11 Final Fours. That legit puts them up there with some of the bluest of bloods when it comes to college basketball, but I don't think I've ever heard anyone call Ohio State a blue blood basketball school. I wonder if that's because majority of their success came over 50 plus years ago, even though I remember some really good basketball coming from Columbus in the early 2010s. When looking at Ohio State's deepest tournament run, we have to go all the way back to the 1959/1960 college basketball season, where a 21-3 Buckeye squad led by Coach Fred Taylor would sprint their way to the Natty, as this team might have one of the most dominating tournament runs ever, winning every game by double digits except for their first game, as they would beat Western Kentucky 98-79. But from there, they would defeat Georgia Tech by 17 and powerhouse New York University by 12, advancing the Buckeyes to the national championship game versus California, where they would win by 20, 75-55, securing Ohio State's lone Natty to date. So for the Oregon Ducks, I'm going to be moving the goalpost for this school's deepest tournament run. I will say Oregon has won a Natty in basketball, but this was all the way back before the 40s, during their 1938 and 1939 season, and that's just too far back for me. I'll count championships in the 50s, but the 30s, that's just nuts, man. So technically, Oregon's deepest tournament run is the 1938/1939 season, but I'm going to be using their 2016/17 season for the video. Oregon would come into that year's tournament with a 29-5 record led by Coach Dana Altman and would take hold of the 3rd seed. The round 1 game would be a blowout against Iona, as the Ducks would win by 16. However, their next game against Rhode Island would be a nail-biter, as Oregon would hit a huge 3 with less than a minute to give them the lead and the edge over Rhode Island, eventually winning the game 75-72, advancing the Ducks to the Sweet 16, where they would win another close game against the Michigan Wolverines 69-68. Oregon was tired of back-to-back anxiety-inducing games and would blow out the first-seeded Kansas Jayhawks by 14, sending Oregon to the Final Four, where they would be matched up against the North Carolina Tar Heels. This game would go down to the wire, but the Tar Heels would come out on top 77-76, ending the Oregon Ducks' deepest tournament run since the 1939 season when they won the Natty. Next up, we got Penn State, and right off the bat, Penn State, what are we doing? There's no reason a school like this should have only made the NCAA men's basketball tournament 5 times since 1965. Like, I know Penn State isn't some big-time basketball school, but you would just logically think a school with Penn State's prestige would be able to field a couple of decent basketball teams, but I guess not. So for the Nifty Lions' deepest run in the tournament, we have to find our Gramps and tell them to dust off the old chest full of keepsakes and pull out newspaper clippings from the 1953/1954 college basketball season, where Penn State would march their way to the Final Four, led by Coach Elmer Gross. In their first game of the tourney, they would face off against Toledo and win 62-50. After the 12-point win, Penn State would defeat both LSU and Notre Dame by 8, sending them to the Final Four, where they would match up against LaSalle. The Nittany Lions would lose 69-54, but don't feel too bad, Penn State fans. They would win the 3rd place game, which I had no idea they had back then, 70-61 against USC, putting an exclamation point on Penn State's deepest tournament run to date. From Penn State, we head to Purdue. Shout out to the Boilermakers, because as of late, they've been one of the best basketball programs in the country, consistently making the tournament and being one of the most recognizable brands in all of college basketball. For the Boilermakers' deepest tournament run, it was literally last year in the 2023/2024 season, as Purdue would claim the 1 seed and honestly looked like they'd have a chance to win the program's first basketball title. As entering the tournament, they would blow out Grambling State 78-50, Utah State 106-67, and in the Sweet 16, a 12-point win against Gonzaga. Purdue would win a pretty tight game against Tennessee 72-66 in the Elite Eight, led by an insane 40-point outburst from Zach Edey. Purdue would match up against the Cinderella story NC State Wolfpack, who were on an improbable run, but Purdue would end the Wolfpack's magical run, winning 63-50, advancing them to the national championship game against the defending champs UConn. If you watched UConn this year, you knew there was no way they were losing to Purdue, as the Boilermakers would lose 75-60, regardless of Zach Edey dropping 37 points. Still, what a run, and don't worry, Purdue fans, while this was still your deepest run to date, I know Purdue will win it all soon, I have a feeling. Next up, we have the Rutgers Scarlet Knights, and for some reason, I thought the Scarlet Knights had a pretty decent basketball program. Most of that, though, probably comes from me knowing that Corey Sanders attended that college, and I used to watch his high school mixtapes. Who else used to watch Hoop Mixtape and Ball Is Life back in the day? Let me know your favorite mixtape of all time. Mine has to be a Kill Cars. Anyway, back to the Scarlet Knights. For their deepest tournament run, we have to travel back to the 1975/1976 college basketball season, where this Rutgers squad was playing elite basketball, as they would enter the tournament with a 27-0 record, led by Coach Tom Young, who'd have this squad buzzing. Well, minus their first game of the tourney, as they would narrowly escape upset from Princeton with a 54-53 win. Rutgers would bounce back, however, defeating UConn 93-79 and the powerhouse basketball school Virginia Military Institute 91-75. In the Final Four, Michigan would get revenge on the Scarlet Knights for beating up on our future troops and would give Rutgers a taste of their own medicine, defeating them 87-70. And to add insult to injury, after suffering their first loss of the season, Rutgers would lose again in the 3rd place game to UCLA 92-106, never making it this far in the NCAA men's tournament since. Moving on to the newcomer in the Big Ten, for UCLA's deepest tournament run, we have to comb through years of success, as the Bruins are without a doubt easily one of the big dogs of the college basketball world, having won 11 national titles with 19 Final Four appearances. For UCLA's deepest March Madness run, we have to go back to the 1994/1995 college basketball season, where 25-2 first-seeded UCLA squad led by Coach Jim Herrick would begin their quest for another natty in the men's basketball tournament. Their first game versus FIU would be a 30-plus point blowout, but in the Bruins' next game, they would see themselves narrowly escaping the upset, winning 75-74 against Missouri. In their Sweet 16 and Elite 8 matchups, they would win comfortably 86-67 against Mississippi State and 102-96 against UConn. UCLA would roll by the Pokes in the Final Four, winning 74-61, and would keep that trend going by winning by 11, 89-78 against Arkansas in the national championship game, giving the Bruins their 11th title and last one to date. Next up, we have the USC Trojans, and for some reason, I could have sworn that they were an elite basketball school, but that might be just because I watched Love and Basketball when I was a kid. I don't know. Anyway, USC has been to 2 Final Fours, both of which happened 50 plus years ago. So for this team, we're going to have to go to the 1953/1954 college basketball season, when Coach Forrest Toogood would lead a 19-14 USC Trojan squad into the NCAA tournament, where they would defeat Idaho State in their first game 73-59, but in their next match, it would take 2 overtimes to decide a winner. The Trojans would fortunately come out on top 66-65 against Santa Clara, but in their Final Four matchup would lose to Bradley 74-72. And to add salt into their wounds, they would also lose in the third place game to their future conference opponent Penn State 70-61. For this next team, the Washington Huskies, we actually only have to go back exactly 1 year from our last entry to the 1952/1953 college basketball season, the only time Washington would make the Final Four. They would enter the tournament during that season with a 25-2 record and were being coached by Tippy Dye. Washington would dominate their first 2 opponents, winning both games by over 12 plus points. They would defeat Seattle 92-70 and Santa Clara 74-62. The magical run, or whatever you would call the 2 games teams had to play back then to make the Final Four, would all come to an end against top-ranked Kansas, as they would lose by over 20 points. But this entry ends on a positive note, as they would blow out LSU in the third place game. Low-key, I think we need to bring back the third place game. What do y'all think? Comment down below. Okay, so we're just about pretty much done with the video. Just one more Big Ten team to go. So for the Wisconsin Badgers, they have won a natty in basketball, but it was all the way back in the 40s. So for the last team in this video, I'm going to choose their 2014/2015 team, where led by Coach Bo Ryan would go on one of the Badgers' deepest tournament runs to date. Entering March Madness with a 31-3 record in the first seed, this Wisconsin team would honestly look like one of the favorites to make it all the way. In their first 2 tournament games, they would win 86-72 against Coastal Carolina and 72-65 against Oregon. In the Sweet 16 versus North Carolina, they would pull out the W 79-72 and would do the same thing to Arizona in the Elite 8, coming out on top 85-78. Wisconsin would advance to the Final Four, where they matched up against another #1 seed in Kentucky. A 20-point outburst and 11-rebound game from Frank Kaminsky would be enough to help the Badgers escape by the Wildcats 71-64. Unfortunately, the Badgers would run into a loaded Duke squad this year in the Natty and lose 68-63. Alright, the first team we're going to be taking a look at in the Big East is the Butler Bulldogs. And before someone drops the comment, I know they're new to the Big East, as they only have played in this conference for 12 years. And for their deepest tournament run, I have to go back to when they were a member of the Horizon Conference and would reach back-to-back national title games. We're going to be using their most recent one for their deepest run, which takes us to the year 2010/2011, when the 23-9 Butler basketball team led by Coach Brad Stevens would enter March Madness as the 8th seed, going on an incredible run for the 2nd year in a row, defeating their first 2 opponents in the tournament by a combined 3 points, winning 60-58 against Old Dominion and 71-70 against the first-seeded Pitt Panthers. Butler would be matched up against the 4th-seeded Wisconsin Badgers in the Sweet 16 and would handle them 61-54, sending them to the Elite 8, where they would play against my 2nd-seeded Florida Gators. This game would be an all-time classic, as it would take overtime to decide the victor, and sadly for me, it wouldn't be my Florida Gators, as the Butler Bulldogs would come out on top 74-71, sending them to the Final Four for the 2nd season in a row. In the Final Four, the Bulldogs would be matched up against another bracket buster in the 11th-seeded VCU Rams. Butler would defeat the Rams 70-62 and face off against UConn in the national championship, where they would lose 53-41, putting an end to Butler's deepest tournament run to date. Next team up in the Big East is the Creighton Blue Jays, and I was kind of shocked to find out that Creighton has never made it to the Final Four, which is crazy to me because in the 2010s when I was really into college basketball, the Blue Jays were always one of those basketball schools in the mix. Anyway, for Creighton's deepest tournament run, we don't have to go back very far, as in the 2022/2023 college basketball season, the Blue Jays went into the tournament with a 21-12 record, as well as being given the 6th seed in the South region. Coach Greg McDermott would have his troops ready, as they would advance past their first 2 opponents, winning against North Carolina State and Baylor. In the Sweet 16, the Blue Jays would be blessed with the matchup against the 15th-seeded Princeton Tigers, winning by 11, 86-75, sending Creighton to the Elite 8, where they would face off against the 5th-seeded San Diego State Aztecs. Sadly, the Blue Jays would fall short to San Diego State 57-56, ending their tournament and being their deepest run to date. Moving over to the DePaul Blue Demons, did y'all know that they haven't made the NCAA men's basketball tournament since 2003/2004? That might be the longest streak in this conference. Don't quote me on that though. So for this team's deepest tournament run, we have to go back to the 1978/1979 college basketball season, where led by Coach Ray Meyer, the at the time powerhouse DePaul Blue Demons would enter the tournament with the 2nd seed and march their way to the Final Four, defeating 7th-seeded USC, 3rd-seeded Marquette, and the #1 seeded UCLA Bruins in the Elite 8. To advance to the Final Four, we would see 2 future NBA stars match up, as DePaul was playing against Larry Bird and Indiana State. Oh yeah, and if you're wondering who the star on the Blue Demons was, it was Mavericks legend Mark Aguirre. And this is random, but bro averaged like 24 points as a freshman, which is cold as hell if you ask me. But yeah, DePaul versus Indiana State would go down to the wire, but it would be Larry Bird advancing to the Natty versus Magic Johnson and Michigan State, as DePaul would lose 76-74 to the Sycamores. But to end this section on a positive note, DePaul would win the third place game versus the Penn Quakers. Next up, we have the Georgetown Hoyas. And first thing I'm going to say is we need Georgetown playing basketball at the high level this program is known for, because in the last 9 seasons, this program has fallen off the map. But you can't keep a program with such a rich history down forever. For this program's deepest tournament run, we have to go back to Georgetown's lone national title, which came in the 1983/1984 college basketball season, led by coaching legend John Thompson and college and NBA legend Patrick Ewing. The Hoyas would claim the 1 seed in the tournament, and in their first game would barely defeat Southern Methodist, as the final score would be 37-36, which is one of the weirdest scores I've ever seen. From there, the Hoyas would win against UNLV and Dayton, setting up a Final Four matchup against the Kentucky Wildcats. Georgetown would come to play and would come out on top 53-40, sending them to the Natty, where they would defeat Houston 84-75 to win their one and only Natty. From Washington, D.C., we head to Wisconsin for the Marquette Golden Eagles. This program has been one of the most successful ones in the Big East Conference, winning a Natty and going to 3 Final Fours. And this doesn't mean anything, but my dad is a huge Heat fan, and Marquette has produced 2 of the best Heat ever in D. Wade and don't hate me Heat fans, but Jimmy Butler too. For Marquette's deepest tournament run, we have to go back to the year they won it all, which was back in 1976/1977, when the Golden Eagles would enter the tournament led by coach Al McGuire with a record of 19-7. In their first game, they would breeze by Cincinnati, but in their next game against Kansas State, they would barely escape with a win, but nevertheless would come out on top 67-66. From there, Marquette would run the Carolinas gauntlet, defeating Wake Forest 82-68, Charlotte 51-49, and finally in the national championship, the Golden Eagles would come out on top of the North Carolina Tar Heels, winning 67-59, giving Marquette their lone men's basketball title to date. Coming in next, we got the Providence Friars, a pretty decent overall basketball program who has made 2 Final Fours in their history. One of those are obviously going to be the Friars' deepest March Madness run, so let's take a look at their most recent one. So going back to the 1986/1987 college basketball season, Providence was heading into the tournament with a 21-8 record, led by your local Hooker's favorite coach, and shit, if I was one of his players, maybe he'd be my favorite coach too, Rick Pitino. Riz Pitino would have his boys ready as they would cruise by their first game in the tournament versus my little sister's school, UAB, 90-68, and would follow that butt whooping up with a much closer 90-87 win against Austin Peay in overtime. The Friars would win their next 2 tournament games by 15+ points, defeating Alabama and Georgetown, advancing to the Final Four where they would get smacked by the Orange 77-63, putting an end to Providence's deepest tournament run to date. Next up, we have the Seton Hall Pirates, and I don't know why, but I could have swore this program was elite. I guess I was wrong, as in the program's 100+ years of playing basketball, they've only made the college basketball tournament 14 times. So you know the choices for their deepest run was slim. But hey, at least they made the Final Four. There are plenty of high-level programs that can't say that. So for their deepest run, it's going to be the season they made it to the Final Four, which was back in 1988/1989, where a 25-6 third-seeded Pirates basketball squad, led by coach PJ Carlissimo, would march their way to the national championship game, defeating Missouri State and Evansville in their first 2 matchups, then would follow that up with double-digit wins against Indiana and UNLV, and would continue the dominant play in the Final Four, defeating the second-seeded Duke Blue Devils 95-78. With all this momentum and how good the Pirates were playing, it was a shock to see them lose a very close game to the Michigan Wolverines in the national championship 80-79. Next team up in the Big East is the St. John's Red Storm. And real quick, this is off topic, but the Red Storm have had 2 hoopers who I really mess with play with them. The first dude is Chris Mullin because he's absolutely automatic on NBA 2K Blacktop and is one of the best shooters of all time. And the other dude is Marcus Levette. Does any hoopers remember him from Hoop Mixtape? Bro had the best handles from a high schooler I've ever seen. I wonder what he's on now. Anyway, St. John's has been to 2 Final Fours in their long history, with their most recent one coming during the 1984/85 college basketball season, where a Red Storm team that had 6 dudes on it who'd sniffed the NBA, most notably Chris Mullin and the dude responsible for Steph Curry's success in the NBA, Mark Jackson, would enter the NCAA tournament with a 27-3 record and the first seed in the West, winning their first game against Southern 83-59, then following that blowout with a close win against the Razorbacks 68-65. The Red Storm wasn't satisfied with just beating up on one current SEC team, as they would win by 16 over the Kentucky Wildcats 86-70, advancing them to the Elite Eight, where they would face off against the third-seeded NC State Wolfpack. A 25-point night from Chris Mullin would be more than enough to push the Red Storm over the top, winning against NC State 69-60, sending them to the Final Four where they would get torn apart by a Patrick Ewing-led Georgetown squad, ending the St. John's Red Storm's deepest tournament run to date. For the UConn Huskies, the next team up in the Big East, I think for their deepest tournament run is pretty obvious. And real quick, I need y'all to let me know down below in the comments, is UConn the new big dogs of the college basketball world? As they have been to 7 Final Fours with 6 national championships, which pretty much means if they make the Final Four, they're probably going to win it all. And also to add on top of that, their last 5 natties have came in the last 20 years, which is just ridiculous. Especially in a sport like college basketball, when the playoffs is just such a large tournament where predicting the winner is a giant crapshoot. But I guess my point in saying all that is bravo UConn, you're them. So for their deepest tournament run, we only have to go back to last year as they are the defending national champions, where led by the madman Dan Hurley would enter the tournament as the first seed with a 31-3 record and absolutely torched their way to the Final Four, leaving no survivors, defeating every opponent in their way by 10 or more points. Winning against Stetson 91-52, Northwestern 75-58, San Diego State 82-52, Illinois 77-52, and if you think things slow down in the Final Four, think again, as against Bama the Huskies would win 86-72 and in the finals would defeat Purdue 75-60, securing the natty for the second year in a row. From a team who has won 5 natties in the last 20 years, we transitioned to a team who has won 2 natties in the last 10 years, the New York Knicks, the Villanova Wildcats. So this program is definitely a part of the upper echelon of the Big East, as Villanova in their long history of playing basketball has been to 7 Final Fours and have won 3 natties in total, with 2 of them, as I mentioned earlier, coming in the last 10 years. So for the Wildcats' deepest tournament run, we're going to have to take a look at their most recent title run, which came in the 2017/2018 college basketball season, where a 30-4 Wildcat squad coached by Jay Wright and led by 3 future Knicks, them being Jalen Brunson, Mikal Bridges, and Dante DiVincenzo, as well as 4 other future NBA picks, would enter the tournament as the 1 seed and go on one of the most dominant March Madness runs I've ever seen, as they would beat every team they faced off against by 12 or more points. Starting off with Radford, as Villanova would easily handle them 87-61. The Wildcats didn't care if you were a big school or a small one, as in their next game they would face off against Alabama and do pretty much the same thing, winning 81-58 to advance to the Sweet 16 versus West Virginia, where they would win by 12. Villanova was running the Big 12 gauntlet because their next 2 games of the tournament would be against Texas Tech and Kansas. The Wildcats would beat the Red Raiders 71-59 and the Kansas Jayhawks in the Final Four 95-79, sending Villanova to the national championship, where they would face off against 7-seeded Michigan and finish off their extremely dominant March Madness run with a 79-62 win against the Wolverines. Alright, we're nearly done with every Big East team, just one more to go. And something that I want to say real quick is the Big East might be pound for pound the best basketball conference because they definitely have a smaller amount of teams compared to the other Power 6 schools, yet the Big East always has a couple of teams in the thick of things going into March. Alright, so for the last team in the Big East, we're looking at the Xavier Musketeers. Man, if I'm being honest, growing up I always remembered them being somewhat of a pretty good and consistent basketball school. So I was kind of shocked to find out that Xavier has never been to a Final Four. But don't get it confused, this program has still had plenty of tournament success, making 3 Elite Eights, with their most recent one coming less than a decade ago, so that will obviously be the one we're going to take a look at for this program's deepest tournament run. Alright, so for the 2016/17 Musketeers, this team was led by coach Chris Mack and would enter the tournament with a decent record but nothing crazy, as they would be 21-13, which was good enough to earn them the 11th seed. Their first 2 games of the men's basketball tournament would be pure domination from Xavier. They would upset Maryland 76-65 and the 3rd seeded Florida State Seminoles 91-66. And trust me, as a Gator fan, I enjoyed watching that game. The Musketeers would advance to the Sweet 16 from there and continue their unlikely run as they would take down the 2nd seeded Arizona Wildcats in a barn burner 73-71, sending Xavier to their 3rd Elite Eight to date, where unfortunately they'd run into a loaded Gonzaga squad where they would get smacked around 83-59, putting an end to Xavier's deepest run to date. First team up in the ACC is the Boston College Eagles. For this program's basketball lore, there isn't really much, as the thing this program is probably most notable for is the point shaving scandal that happened during the 1978/79 basketball season when the Mafia bribed a couple of Boston College players to fix the games. Other than that, Boston College has been pretty quiet in the world of college basketball. As I'm currently recording this video, they're going on 16 years of not making the men's basketball tournament. Anyway, for Boston College's deepest run, we have to go all the way back to the 1993/1994 college basketball season, where coached by Jim O'Brien and led by Bill Curley, the 2010 9th-seeded Boston College Eagles would open up with 2 nail-biters, taking down the Washington State Cougars in their first round game 67-64 and the 1st-seeded North Carolina Tar Heels 75-72 in their second round game. In the East Regional semifinals against the Indiana Hoosiers, Boston College would continue their magical run, winning 77-68, sending Boston College to the Elite Eight, where they would sadly get taken down by the Florida Gators 74-66, putting an end to the Boston College Eagles' deepest March Madness run to date. Next team up in the ACC is the Cal Golden Bears, and while this program hasn't been making too much noise around the college basketball world as of late, they do have some pretty interesting lore, going to 3 Final Fours and winning 1 national title, and also being the school that the 2024/25 NBA Finals MVP went to, Jaylen Brown. Alright, so for the Cal Golden Bears' deepest men's basketball tournament run, we have to take a look at that natty of theirs, which takes us all the way back to the 1958/59 college basketball season. We're coached by Pete Newell and led by the senior guard Denny Fitzpatrick. The 21-4 Cal Golden Bears would start their natty run with 2 blowout wins in the tourney, taking down Utah 71-53 and St. Mary's 66-46. In the national semifinals against the Cincinnati Bearcats, Cal would win 64-58 despite the NBA legend Oscar Robinson dropping an insane 19 points, 19 rebounds, and 9 assists, sending Cal to the natty where they would take down the Jerry West-led West Virginia Mountaineer squad 71-70. Next team up in the ACC is the Clemson Tigers. This school is obviously more known for their football accolades than basketball ones, but don't sleep on the Clemson basketball department, as even though they haven't won a national title or made the Final Four, they've still been pretty good, making a couple of deep runs in March, and while I'm recording, Clemson is sitting at 26-5, and looks like they are gearing up for another deep run. Anyway, for the Tigers' deepest tournament run, we only have to go back 1 year to the 2023/24 college basketball season. We're coached by Brad Burnell and led by PJ Hall. The 21-11 6-seeded Clemson Tigers would start their men's basketball tournament off, winning against New Mexico 77-56 and Baylor 72-64, sending them to the Sweet 16 where they would face off against the Arizona Wildcats. This game would be tight, but thanks to an 18-point night from Chase Hunter and a 17-point night from PJ Hall, Clemson would come out on top, winning 77-72 against Arizona, advancing them to the Elite Eight where they would lose to a red-hot Alabama Crimson Tide basketball team 89-82, putting an end to the Clemson Tigers' deepest tournament run to date. From Clemson, we rotate over to the Duke Blue Devils, easily one of the most recognizable brands in not just the ACC, but throughout the entire college basketball world, as Duke has won 5 national championships, been to just an absurd 17 Final Fours, as well as producing many of your favorite NBA players. And an even crazier stat that I found is Duke has only missed the men's basketball tournament 3 times since the 1983/84 college basketball season, which just shows you how long Duke has been dominating college basketball for. Okay, so for the Blue Devils' deepest March Madness run, it obviously is going to be one of those 5 natties I mentioned, which takes us back to the 2014/15 college basketball season, where coached by the GOAT Mike Krzyzewski and led by Jahlil Okafor, the 29-4 first-seeded Blue Devils would start their tourney off with 2 blowout wins against Robert Morris, 85-56, and San Diego State, 68-49. In the Sweet 16, things would be a little closer as Duke would only win 63-57 against Utah, thanks to a 21-point outburst from Justice Winslow, but would get right back to blowing teams out, winning against Gonzaga 65-52, and in the Final Four versus Michigan State 81-61. And finally, to finish off Duke's latest national title run, a 68-63 win against Wisconsin. Next team up in the ACC is the Florida State Seminoles. This program hasn't been too dominant when it comes to college basketball, but they have been pretty decent, making it to 1 Final Four, the Elite Eight twice, and a handful of Sweet 16s. Although unfortunately, when I'm recording this video, it looks like the Seminoles are going to extend their streak of not making the men's basketball tournament from 3 years to 4 years, unless they somehow win the ACC tournament. But with how good Duke looks, I don't know, man, it's going to be tough. So for the Florida State Seminoles' deepest tournament run, we have to go back to that Final Four I mentioned earlier, which takes us back to the 1971/1972 college basketball season, where coached by Hugh Durham and led by Ron King, the 18-5 Florida State Seminoles would open up the men's basketball tournament, barely escaping against Eastern Kentucky 83-81. However, the Seminoles would dominate their next 2 opponents, taking down Minnesota 70-56 and Kentucky 73-54, advancing the Noles to the Final Four where they would match up against the North Carolina Tar Heels. And thanks to a 22-point night from Ron King, Florida State would defeat North Carolina 79-75, sending them to the national championship where they would lose to the UCLA Bruins 81-76, putting an end to Florida State's deepest March Madness run to date. From Tally, we head up to Georgia, more specifically the A, for the next team up in the ACC, the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. As of late, Georgia Tech has really fallen off the map, not making the men's tourney in the last 3 years. As I'm currently recording this video, they're sitting at 16-5, looking like they might not make it to the big dance once again. However, while the Yellow Jackets haven't been hot as of late, they do have some pretty decent history, making the Final Four twice, which takes us to their deepest run in March, which happened back during the 2003/2004 college basketball season. We're coached by Paul Hewitt and led by Jarrett Jack. The 23-9 third-seeded Yellow Jackets would open up March with a 65-60 win against Northern Iowa, and in a close call 57-54 against Boston College, sending Tech to the Sweet 16 where they would face off against Nevada, where thanks to a 23-point outburst from Marvin Lewis, it would give the Yellow Jackets the edge over the Wolfpack, winning 72-67, sending them to the Elite Eight where they would take down the Kansas Jayhawks 79-71. And in the Final Four, the game would go down to the wire, but the Yellow Jackets would come out on top, winning 67-65, advancing them to the national championship game where they would lose to the UConn Huskies 82-73, putting an end to their deepest run to date. Next team up in the ACC is the Louisville Cardinals. And besides Duke and North Carolina, there isn't many teams in the ACC conference that can say they've been historically better than the Louisville Cardinals, as the Cards have gotten to 10 Final Fours and won 3 NCAA national championships, putting them in some pretty elite company. And while the program has had a little bump in the road because of the Rick Pitino scandal going on 5 straight years of not making the men's basketball tournament, as I'm recording, they look like a lock to make the big dance, so hopefully they can make some noise. For Louisville's deepest tourney run, I'm going to be using their 2013 Natty run, even though it's vacated, which takes us back to the 2012/2013 college basketball season. We're coached by Riz Pitino and led by Russ Smith. The 29-5 first-seeded Cards would open up their Natty run with 2 easy wins versus North Carolina A&T and Colorado State. In the Sweet 16 versus Oregon, things would be all business for Louisville, as Russ Smith would drop a 31 bomb, helping the Cards take down the Ducks 77-69. Louisville would keep the momentum rolling, dominating Duke 85-63 in the Elite Eight. However, things would slow down in the Final Four, as Louisville would actually be down for a good majority of the game against the Shockers. But a 20-point outburst from Luke Hancock would give the Cards the edge, helping them win 72-68 in the Final Four, sending them to the Natty where they would finish off the job against Michigan in the finals, winning 82-76. From one of the blue bloods of the ACC, we move over to a team who has just been pretty good, the Miami Hurricanes. Now, while the basketball program hasn't been crazy dominant over their history, only making the men's basketball tournament 12 times, and while I'm recording, they're sitting at 7-24 with their season pretty much over, I will say they have made the Final Four, and it came not too long ago, so let's take a look at it, which takes us back to the 2022/23 college basketball season, where coached by Jim Larinaga and led by Isaiah Wong, the 25-7 fifth-seeded Miami Hurricanes would open up their Final Four run with 2 good wins, taking down DG Academics' favorite college Drake 63-56 and Indiana 85-69. Versus the first-seeded Houston Cougars in the Sweet 16, Nigel Pack of the Hurricanes would drop 26 points, packing the Cougars out 89-75 in a game that Houston was favored by 8 in. In the Elite Eight, they were matched up against the Texas Longhorns. The Hurricanes would hold on and come out on top 88-81, sending the Canes to the Final Four where they would lose to the eventual national champs in the UConn Huskies 72-59, putting it into the Miami Hurricanes' deepest tournament run to date. The next team we're going to be looking at in the ACC is the NC State Wolfpack. North Carolina State has been one of the better teams in the ACC overall, going to 4 Final Fours and winning 2 national championships. And this is just my opinion, but the Wolfpack to me are the kings of the Cinderella March Madness run. Not having just one crazy run that would only happen because of miraculously winning the conference tournament, but 2. And for the Wolfpack's deepest tournament run, we're going to be looking at one of those 2 crazy runs, which takes us back to the 1982/1983 college basketball season, where coached by the late Jimmy V and led by Thurl Bailey, the 20-10 6-seeded NC State Wolfpack would start their tournament off with a double overtime thriller against Pepperdine that they should have honestly lost, but this year God was taking shots for them, so they'd win 69-67. And the butt clitchers wouldn't stop there, as in their next game they would take down UNLV 71-70 thanks to a 25-point night from Thurl Bailey, sending the Wolfpack to the Sweet 16 where they would finally have an easy win, taking down Utah 75-56. But right after that, we were right back to the close games, as North Carolina State would barely escape the first-seeded Virginia Cavaliers 63-62, and in the Final Four against Georgia 67-60, sending them to the Natty where they would match up against the Hakeem Olajuwon/Clyde Drexler-led Houston Cougars. And I think we all know how this would end, as the Wolfpack would win 54-52. Putting an end to maybe the greatest March Madness run ever. Staying in the state of North Carolina, the next team up in the ACC is the North Carolina Tar Heels. And I mean, just like Duke, what is there to say about North Carolina that hasn't already been said? As the Tar Heels are easily one of the most recognizable brands in basketball, producing countless top NBA draft picks as well as going to just a ridiculous 21 Final Fours, and winning 6 national titles. So when looking at the Tar Heels' deepest March Madness run, we're going to have to take a look at one of those 6 natties of theirs, which takes us back to the 2016/17 college basketball season, where coached by Roy Williams and led by countless NBA players, most notably to me, Justin Jackson, the 27-7 first-seeded Tar Heels would begin their natty run with a blowout against Texas Southern, 103-64, followed by a much closer win but still a good performance from North Carolina against Arkansas, 72-65. In the Sweet 16, the Tar Heels would handle Butler, 92-80, but from there things would get much tighter. As versus Kentucky, North Carolina would win 75-73, and in the Final Four versus Oregon, it would take a 25-point, 14-rebound night from Kennedy Meek to give the Tar Heels the edge over the Ducks, 77-76. And in the natty, North Carolina would finish off the run, winning against the Gonzaga Bulldogs, 71-65. Next team up in the ACC is the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, and while their basketball department isn't on the same level as the football department, they've still been pretty decent, making 1 Final Four and being pretty consistent in the world of college basketball. Oh yeah, and this is mad random, but one of my cats is named Lou, or Dr. Lou, and yes, he is named after Lou Holtz. Anyway, for the Fighting Irish deepest tournament run, we're going to be taking a look at that Final Four I mentioned, which takes us back to the 1977/78 college basketball season, where coached by Digger Phelps and led by Dave Baton and the bad boy Piston himself, Bill Laimbeer, the 19-6 Notre Dame Fighting Irish would open up their tourney with 2 pretty good wins, taking down Houston 100-77 and Utah 65-56, sending the Irish to the regional final where they would match up against DePaul and put the beats on them, winning 84-64. Unfortunately, against the Duke Blue Devils in the Final Four, Notre Dame would lose 90-86, and to add salt to their wounds, they would lose to Arkansas in the 3rd place game, putting an end to Notre Dame's deepest tournament run to date. From Notre Dame, we head over to the University of Pittsburgh for the next team up in the ACC, the Pittsburgh Panthers. When looking through their basketball lore, Pittsburgh has 1 Final Four, and I was kind of surprised at how good the Panthers were from 2001 to 2011, making the men's basketball tourney as a 3rd seed or better 7 times, which is pretty impressive. Although it seems as of late, the Panthers have hit a tough stride, only making the men's basketball tournament once in the last 9 years. Anyway, for this program's deepest tourney run, we're not looking at their Final Four run because it came all the way back during the 1940/41 college basketball season. Instead, we're going to be looking at something a little more recent, which takes us to the 2008/2009 college basketball season, where coached by Jamie Dixon and led by Sam Young, the 28-4 first-seeded Pitt Panthers would begin their march with the win against East Tennessee State 72-62, and would follow that win up with the 84-76 win against Oklahoma State. In the Sweet 16 against Xavier, a 19-point night from Sam Young would help propel the Panthers over the Musketeers 60-55, sending them to the Elite Eight where they would lose to Villanova in a tight game 78-76, putting an end to one of the Pitt Panthers' more recent deep runs in March. Moving on to one of the newcomers in the ACC, the SMU Mustangs. Man, this program hasn't been too hot as of late, only making the men's basketball tournament 4 times in the last 39 years. Although while I'm recording this video, the Mustangs do look like they might get in this year, so hopefully they do. So for this program's deepest tourney run, there isn't really much to choose from, so we're going to have to go all the way back to the 1955/1956 college basketball season, where coached by Doc Hayes and led by Jim Krebs, the 19-2 SMU Mustangs would open up their tournament with a barn burner against Texas Tech that they would barely escape in, winning 68-67. Their next 2 games of the tourney would be a lot smoother, as they would take down Houston 89-74 and Oklahoma City 84-63, sending the Mustangs to the national semifinal where they would get blown out by the San Francisco Dons 86-68, and they would also lose in the 3rd place game 90-81 to Temple, putting an end to SMU's deepest tournament run to date. From one of the newer ACC teams to another one in the Stanford Cardinal, this program has been to 2 Final Fours as well as winning it all way back during during the 1941/42 college basketball season, and has been pretty decent throughout their history of playing high-level basketball. Although I do have to mention that as I'm recording, the Stanford Cardinal are going on 11 straight years of not making the men's basketball tournament, so hopefully they can turn things around soon. For Stanford's deepest tournament run, we're going to be looking at one of those two Final Fours, which actually came back-to-back instead of their natty run, since it happened way too long ago, which takes us back to the 1997/98 college basketball season. We're coached by Mike Montgomery and led by Arthur Lee. The 27-4 third-seeded Stanford Cardinal would begin their Final Four run with two impressive wins, taking down the College of Charleston 67-57 and Western Michigan 83-65. In the Sweet 16 against Purdue, a 15-point night from Mark Madsen would help give the Cards the edge, coming out on top of the Boilermakers 67-59, sending them to the Elite Eight where they would take down Rhode Island in a tight game 79-77. Unfortunately, this magical run would come to an end in the Final Four versus Kentucky, as the Cardinal would lose to the Wildcats 86-65. Alright, next team up in the ACC is the Syracuse Orange, and I don't know why, but I could have sworn that Syracuse has won at least 3 national titles, but that's not the case, as they have only won a single national title, as well as going to 6 Final Fours. But still, those accomplishments are nothing to scoff at, as the Orange are definitely one of the big dogs of the college basketball world. Although as of late they haven't been too hot, not making the tourney for going on 4 straight years. But we're here for their deepest run, so let's talk about that championship of theirs, which takes us back to the 2002/2003 college basketball season. We're coached by Jim Boeheim and led by Carmelo Anthony. The 24-5 Orange would start their championship run with 2 wins in Boston versus Manhattan, 76-65, and Oklahoma State 68-56. In the Sweet 16 versus Auburn, an 18-point, 8-rebound night for Melo would help the Orange survive a barn burner against Auburn, as they would win 79-78. Versus Oklahoma, Syracuse would bowl them out 63-47. And in the Final Four versus Texas, a 33-point, 14-rebound night from Carmelo Anthony would propel the Orange over the Longhorns 95-84, sending them to the Natty, where they would finish off their championship run with an 81-78 win against the Kansas Jayhawks. From the Orange, we rotate over to the Virginia Cavaliers to talk about the next team up in the ACC. The Cavs have actually been one of the better ACC schools overall, winning 1 national title and going to 3 Final Fours. And this is just a random fact, but from 2013 to 2019, Virginia would make the men's basketball tournament as a 2nd seed or higher 5 times, with 4 of those seasons having them as the 1 seed, which is just pretty impressive. It's not too many programs can be that dominant for that long, even though it was only like a 6 or 7 year stretch. Anyway, for Virginia's deepest tournament run, we're going to be looking at that championship of theirs, which takes us back to the 2018/19 college basketball season. We're coached by Tony Bennett and led by Kyle Guy and DeAndre Hunter. The 29-3 first-seeded Virginia Cavaliers would open up their march with 2 dominant wins versus Gardner-Webb 71-56 and Oklahoma 63-51. In the Sweet 16 versus the Ducks, the Cavs would escape a close one, winning 53-49. And in the Elite Eight versus Purdue, the game would require overtime, and even though the Boilermakers guard Carson Edward would drop a nasty 42 points, Virginia would survive, winning 80-75, and would follow that up with a controversial win against Auburn in the Final Four, where maybe a double dribble should have been called, but it's history now, as Virginia would win 63-62. And the Cavaliers would finish off their natty run, taking down the Texas Tech Red Raiders 85-77, bringing home Virginia's lone basketball title. Next team up in the ACC is the Virginia Tech Hokies, and unlike their extremely dominant football department, the basketball side of things have been just about average, not making it to the Final Four and only making the tournament a total of 13 times. And while I'm currently recording, the Hokies currently look like they most likely won't be making the men's basketball tournament this year. Anyway, for Virginia Tech's deepest March Madness run, we're going to have to go all the way back to the 1966/67 college basketball season. We're coached by Howie Shannon and led by Glenn Combs. The 17-6 Hokies would open up the men's basketball tournament with an 82-76 win against Toledo in their first round game. The Hokies' next game in the NCAA tourney would be versus the Indiana Hoosiers, and thanks to a 29-point night from the Hokies star guard Glenn Combs, it would give the Hokies the edge over the Hoosiers, winning 79-70, sending them to the regional final where they would lose to the Dayton Flyers 71-66, putting an end to the Hokies' deepest March Madness run to date. Leaving Virginia, we head over to North Carolina for the final team left to cover in the ACC, the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. Now, Wake Forest kind of surprised me, and not in the good way. I could have sworn the Demon Deacons had won a title and been to a couple of Final Fours, not just one, but I was totally wrong, as Wake Forest has only been to 1 Final Four, and surprisingly to me, it does not come during the years with Tim Duncan or Chris Paul. But hey, that's college basketball for you. Even when you have a future top 20 all-time player on your squad, you can still come up short in the tournament. So for the Demon Deacons' deepest tournament run, we're going to have to go all the way back to the 1961/62 college basketball season. We're coached by Bones McKinney, no Sesh Hollow Water Boys, and led by Lynn Chappelle, who averaged just an absurd 30 points and 15 rebounds. The 18-8 Wake Forest Demon Deacons would begin their run with back-to-back overtime wins, starting off with the 92-82 win against Yale that saw Lynn Chappelle dropping 25 and 18. Bro was just a straight-up beast, and his team would need every bit of that huge stat line. And next up, taking down St. Joseph's 86-85 in overtime, setting up a matchup versus Villanova with a trip to the semifinals on the line. Wake Forest would come out on top 76-69 and face off against Ohio State in the semifinals, where sadly they would be outplayed, losing 84-68. But to end this video on a positive note, Wake Forest would win the third place game 82-80 against UCLA. Alright, so the first team up in the Big 12 is the Arizona State Sun Devils. This program is probably the definition of just average, as they never do anything too crazy, but at the same time, they're never a bad team, just pretty average. So it should be no surprise the Sun Devils have never made a natty or made it to the Final Four. However, I will mention that this program has been to 3 Elite Eights, which is going to take us to Arizona State's deepest tournament run, which would happen back during the 1974/75 college basketball season, where a dominant 22-3 Sun Devil squad led by coach Ned Wolk would win their opening game of the tournament against Alabama in a close one, 97-94. In their next matchup against UNLV, the Sun Devils would again win by 3, 84-81, sending them to the Elite Eight, where they would face off against the juggernaut UCLA Bruins. UCLA would put an end to Arizona State's tournament run, defeating them 89-75, ending the Sun Devils' deepest tournament run to date. You know it's only logical that after Arizona State, we talk about Arizona. And man, these two programs are night and day when it comes to basketball, as the Wildcats have made it to 4 Final Fours and have won 1 national championship, as well as producing countless first-round NBA draft picks. And this is off topic, but I lost so much bread on a parlay because of that half-court shot Caleb Love made to send the game into overtime against Iowa State. Anyway, for Arizona's deepest men's basketball tournament run, we have to take a look at the year they won the Natty, all the way back in the 1996/97 season, when this loaded squad, who had 5 future NBA players on it, most notably Mike Bibby and Jason Terry, would enter the tournament with a 19-9 record as the 4th seed. In their first 2 games of the tournament, they would take down South Alabama 65-57 and the College of Charleston 73-69, sending them to the Sweet 16, where they would face off against the first-seeded Kansas Jayhawks. This game would be tight the entire way through, but a 21-point night from Mike Bibby would help push the Wildcats over Kansas 85-82. The rest of the tournament would be one long ride for Arizona, as they would barely escape Providence in overtime, winning 96-92, taking down North Carolina in the Final Four 66-58, and finally to finish off the Natty run, another overtime thriller, winning 84-79 to bring home Arizona's lone basketball Natty. Next up in the Big 12, we have the BYU Cougars, and I have no idea why in my head I expected a little more accolades from this school, but I guess that's just because BYU is just a good all-around school when it comes to sports. So I don't know, I thought they would have at least made it to a Final Four, but no, that's not the case, as this program has never made it to the Final Four, but they have made it to an Elite Eight, which happened all the way back during the 1980/81 college basketball season, where a 22-6 6-seeded BYU Cougars squad coached by Frank Arnold and led by future NBA guard Danny Ainge, who was averaging a nasty 24.4 points per game, would come into the tourney defeating the Ivy League boys Princeton 60-51, and then after that would blow out UCLA 78-55, riding that momentum all the way into the Sweet 16, where they would barely escape the Notre Dame Fighting Irish 51-50, advancing to the Elite Eight, where they would get blown out by the Virginia Cavaliers 74-60, putting an end to BYU's longest tournament run to date. From Utah, we travel to Texas for our next team up in the Big 12, the Baylor Bears. This program has been to 3 Final Fours and won 1 national championship, which was actually not too long ago. And I know Baylor isn't known as some top basketball program, but ever since Coach Scott Drew took over the team in 2005, Baylor has consistently made the tournament and been ranked as the #1 team in the country 3 different times during his tenure. So for the Bears' deepest tournament run, we have to take a look at their Natty run, which happened during the 2020/21 college basketball season, where a 28-2 Baylor basketball team led by 3 future NBA players, most notably Davion Mitchell, would enter the tournament as a #1 seed, scrapping their way to the Natty, winning by double digits in their first 2 games against Hartford 79-55 and Wisconsin 76-53. In the Sweet 16, Baylor would see themselves matched up against the Villanova Wildcats. A 14-point night from Davion Mitchell and a 16-point outburst from Adam Flagler would be enough to push the Bears over Villanova 62-51. Baylor would win against Arkansas 81-72, sending them to their 3rd Final Four in program history, where they would match up against the Houston Cougars. Baylor was on fire this game, blowing out the Cougars 78-59, but one blowout wasn't good enough, as they would nearly do the same thing against Gonzaga in the national championship game, winning 86-70, bringing home Baylor's only basketball national title to date. Our next team up in the Big 12 is the Cincinnati Bearcats. Now, while as of late this program hasn't been too relevant, as they haven't made the tournament in the last 5 years, I will mention though that while I'm recording this video, they're currently on the bubble, so hopefully they can make it in. Anyway, while this program hasn't been too good as of late, historically the Bearcats have had some success, going to 6 Final Fours and winning 2 national championships. So for Cincinnati's deepest tournament run, we have to take a look at one of their 2 natties, which came during the 1961/1962 college basketball season, where with the 24-2 record led by Coach Ed Jucker would cruise by their first 2 teams in the tournament, winning 64-46 against Creighton and 73-46 against the Colorado Buffaloes. In their semifinal game against the UCLA Bruins, they wouldn't run away with the game and win by double digits, as it would take a 36-point, 19-rebound game from Paul Hogue to put the Bearcats on top of the UCLA Bruins 72-70, sending Cincinnati to the national championship for the 2nd year in a row, where they would face off against their in-state rivals Ohio State, winning in dominant fashion 71-59 to bring home this program's 2nd basketball national championship. From one new team in the Big 12, we rotate over to a team who was in the Big 12, then moved to the Pac-12, but is now back in the Big 12, the Colorado Buffaloes. Unlike their football team, the men's basketball team hasn't made too much noise in the college basketball world, although they did beat my Gators in the tournament last year. And even though their basketball history isn't anything crazy, they have been to 2 Final Fours, so we're going to be taking a look at one of those 2 for Colorado's deepest tournament run. For that, we have to go all the way back to the 1954/55 college basketball season, where a 16-5 Buff squad led by Coach B.B. Lee would attempt to run the gauntlet and claim a natty. Their first 2 games in the tournament would be all business, as they would take down Tulsa 69-59 and Bradley 93-81. In the national semifinals, Colorado would face off against a loaded San Francisco squad and would lose 62-50 to the Bill Russell-led Dons, putting an end to Colorado's longest tournament run to date. But hey, they would win the 3rd place game against Iowa 75-74. Next, we have one of the most successful basketball programs in the Big 12, the Houston Cougars. This program kind of has a weird thing going on. They were elite in the early 80s, going to 3 straight Final Fours, and then they kind of fell off for a while. But ever since Coach Kelvin Sampson took over this program, they have once again claimed their spots as one of the big dogs in the college basketball world, going on deep March Madness runs for 4 straight seasons. And with the way they look this year, they might be in store for another one. However, even with all this current success, for Houston's deepest run, we have to go all the way back to the 1983/84 college basketball season, when a 25-4 second-seeded Houston squad led by Coach Guy Lewis and NBA legend Hakeem Olajuwon would enter the tournament looking for their 3rd straight Final Four appearance and hopefully winning the Natty. As in the season before, they would be upset in the national championship game by the NC State Wolfpack. In the Cougars' first 2 games of the tourney, they would handle their opponents, defeating Louisiana Tech 77-69 and Memphis 78-71. In the Sweet 16, Houston would win by 5 against Wake Forest, making the Final Four for the 3rd season in a row. And led by a 17-point night from Michael Young, the Cougars would advance past Virginia in a nail-biter 49-47. For the 2nd year in a row, Houston was in the Natty, and nothing would change as they would lose to a pretty stacked Georgetown team 84-75. Iowa State kind of surprised me while looking into their history, as I can't lie, I'm kind of impressed with how consistent this program is when it comes to making the men's basketball tournament, as you can pretty much guarantee the Cyclones will make the tournament. They might not make it far, but they're still going to make it. In this program's history, they've only been to 1 Final Four, but that happened way back in the 40s, and that's right at the cutoff, so we're going to have to look at a more recent one, which takes us to the 1999/2000 college basketball season, where Iowa State, led by Coach Larry Eustachy, would enter the tournament as the 2nd seed with a record of 29-4. The Cyclones would start their tournament off on fire, winning by double digits in their first 2 games, taking down Central Connecticut 88-78 and Auburn 79-60. No cap, this Iowa State squad was looking like it was the one, as in the Sweet 16 against UCLA, the Cyclones would keep the streak of double-digit wins alive, winning 80-56 against the Bruins, advancing to the Elite Eight where they would face off against the Michigan State Spartans. The double-digit winning streak would end here. Actually, every streak would end here, as the Spartans would take down the Cyclones 75-64, ending Iowa State's March Madness run. Next up, we got one of the blue bloods of the college basketball world, the Kansas Jayhawks. And does anybody here remember the ESPN 30 for 30 No Place Like Home, where this Jayhawk fan went through hell and back to bring the rules of basketball back to Kansas? Man, there wasn't anything like ESPN 30 for 30s. They had nothing but bangers when I was a kid. Comment your favorite 30 for 30 down below. Mine has to be Winning Time, Reggie Miller versus the New York Knicks. Back to the Jayhawks. This program has been to 16 Final Fours and has won 4 national championships, with 2 of them coming in the last 20 years. So obviously for their deepest run, we're going to be looking at their most recent natty, which actually only happened a couple years ago during the 2021/2022 college basketball season. This Kansas squad was loaded, with countless top 100 players and 3 future NBA players, most notably to me, NBA champion Chris Braun. Kansas would enter the tournament coached by Bill Self and would take the 1st seed with a record of 28-6. The Jayhawks would win against Texas Southern and Creighton in their first 2 games, sending them to the Sweet 16, where they would match up against Providence. Kansas would escape a close one 66-61 and would play much better in the Elite Eight, taking down Miami 76-50. In the Final Four, Kansas would also blow out Villanova 81-65, sending them to the national championship game where they would finish off the run, taking down North Carolina 72-69. From Kansas, we go to Kansas for the next team up, the Kansas State Wildcats. And if any of you are wondering, no, I'm not a Kansas State fan, even though my profile pic might suggest otherwise. I'm a Gators fan. Kansas State has been pretty good at basketball, as this program has been to 4 Final Fours in the Elite Eight 14 times. If you're shocked by that number, trust me, I was too. For their deepest run, we're going to have to take a look at one of their Final Four runs, which happened well over 50 years ago. The one we're looking at happened during the 1963/64 college basketball season, where a 19-5 Wildcat squad led by Tex Winter would call their way to the Final Four, winning by 4 against UTEP and by 8 against Wichita State 94-86. In the Final Four versus the Bruins, Kansas State would lose 90-84, and to make things worse, in their 3rd place game, they would lose 190, putting an end to their deepest tournament run to date. Next team up, we have the Oklahoma State Polks, and this program has been pretty consistent and may even surprise some of you with their accolades. They have been to 11 Elite Eight, 6 Final Fours, and have won 2 national championships. Now, while the Polks have won 2 national championships, those came right before the cutoff for this video, which is the 1950s. The Cowboys won both of these titles in the 40s, as they actually won titles back-to-back in 1945 and 1946. So for the deepest run, I'm going to be looking at one of their Final Four appearances, with the most recent one coming during the 2004/2005 college basketball season, where a 27-3 second-seeded Polk squad led by Coach Eddie Sutton and NBA champion Tony Allen were going on a dominant March Madness run, winning their first 2 games of the tournament by double digits, taking down Eastern Washington 75-56 and Memphis 70-53. In the Sweet 16, the Polks would keep up their high level of play, taking down the 3rd-seeded Pitt Panthers 63-51. The double-digit wins would stop in the Elite Eight, as against the number 1 seeded St. John's Red Storm, the game would go down to the wire, but a 19-point night from John Lucas of the Polks would be enough to put the Cowboys on top 64-62, punching their ticket to the Final Four, where unfortunately they would lose a close game to the Georgia Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets 67-65, putting it into their March Madness run. Next team up is the TCU Horned Frogs. This program doesn't really have much basketball history as they have never made it to the Final Four and have only made the Elite Eight one time. I will mention though, this program has made the tournament the last 3 years, but while I'm recording this video, they're currently looking like they might not make it in this year, so hopefully they can turn it around. Anyway, for the Horned Frogs' deepest tournament run, we have to go all the way back to the 1967-68 college basketball season, where led by coach Johnny Swaim, a 12-10 TCU squad would sneak their way into the dance, where in their first game they would take down Kansas State 77-72, but that is where their run would end, as in their next game versus the Houston Cougars, they get smacked 103-68, putting it into their tournament. So we're staying in the state of Texas for the next team up in the Big 12, the Texas Tech Red Raiders, who just like the Horned Frogs doesn't have the richest basketball history, but as of late they've really emerged as a pretty good and consistent basketball program, actually making it to the Final Four and playing in the national championship not too long ago, which takes us to the 2018-19 college basketball season, where the third-seeded 26-6 Red Raiders, led by coach Chris Beard, would go on a pretty dominant tournament run to the Final Four, winning by double digits in every game up until the Elite Eight, winning 72-57 against Northern Kentucky, 78-58 against Buffalo, 63-44 against second-seeded Michigan, and in the Elite Eight, things would slow down just a bit as the game versus Gonzaga would be much closer, but Texas Tech would still pull away, winning by 6, 75-69. Versus Michigan State in the Final Four, a 22-point outburst from Matt Mooney would be more than enough to push the Red Raiders past the Spartans, winning 61-51, advancing Texas Tech to the Natty where they would face off against the number 1 seeded Virginia Cavaliers. This is where the Red Raiders' run would come to an end, as they would lose 85-77 in the national championship game. This next one is going to be extremely quick, as the UCF Knights haven't done much in the college basketball world, only making the men's basketball tournament 5 times and never making it very deep, so let's get this one done quick. For the Knights' deepest March Madness run, we have to go back to the 2018-2019 college basketball season, where the UCF Knights, led by coach John Dawkins, would make the tourney as the 9th seed, would win their first game in tournament history against the 8th-seeded VCU Rams 73-58. In their next game, they would come super close to pulling off a huge upset against the first-seeded Duke Blue Devils, but would fall just short 77-76, ending the Knights' deepest tournament run to date. Next team up in the Big 12 is a newcomer to the league, the Utah Utes. I was kind of shocked to learn that this program has been to 4 Final Fours and even won a national championship, although I do have to mention that this happened all the way back in the 40s, more specifically during the 1943-44 college basketball season. But that's right at the cutoff line for this video, so we're going to have to look at their next deepest March Madness run, which takes us to the 1997-98 college basketball season, where a 25-3 third-seeded Ute squad, led by coach Rick Majoris, I probably said that wrong, sorry, would attempt to claim Utah's second natty in program history. The Utes' first 2 games of the tournament would be all business, as they would take down San Francisco 85-68 and Arkansas 75-69. The Sweet 16 versus West Virginia would be a nail-biter, but Utah would survive 65-62. Utah's next 2 games would be versus 2 number 1 seeds, and the Utes would go to work, winning 76-51 against Arizona and 65-59 against North Carolina, advancing Utah to the national championship, where they would lose to the Kentucky Wildcats 78-69, putting it into the Utah Utes' deepest tournament run to date besides the year they won the Natty. Alright, for the final team in the Big 12, we have the West Virginia Mountaineers. Once again, we're back with not so much of a dominant basketball program, but one that has been pretty consistent, as they have been a mainstay in the men's basketball tournament for the last 20 years, making one of this program's 2 Final Fours during that window. And since this program only has been to 2 Final Fours, we're going to have to look at their most recent one for this entry, which takes us back to the 2009-2010 college basketball season, where coached by Bob Huggins, the 27-6 West Virginia Mountaineers would look to claim the program's first men's basketball national championship. West Virginia's first 2 games of the tournament would see the Mountaineers playing great ball, as they would defeat Morgan State 77-50 and Missouri 68-59. In the Sweet 16 versus Washington, West Virginia would walk away with a 13-point victory, beating them 69-56, advancing them to the Elite Eight, where they would face off against Kentucky with a trip to the Final Four on the line. West Virginia would stay hot, pulling off the win 73-66, sending the Mountaineers to the Final Four, where they would sadly get blown out by Duke 78-57, putting an end to West Virginia's deepest tournament run to date and the end of this video. If you made it this far, make sure you leave a like and a sub. I'm out.